The flute of champagne was still trembling in her hand when he said it, not whispered, not murmured into the neck of a collar, not implied through a raised eyebrow or a deliberate pause. Said it clearly, cleanly, with the practiced ease of a man who had never once in his professional life been corrected in public, who had lived so long inside the assurance of his own authority, that cruelty had ceased to feel like a choice and had become instead simply a register, the natural key in which he communicated with people he considered beneath him. "I believe," Richard Hale announced to no one in particular, but to everyone within earshot, which was, in the particular acoustics of the Hartwell Grand Ballroom's east alcove, approximately 30 people, "that they let just about anyone in these days. I saw the valet hand her a program when she walked in, and she didn't even know which end to hold." Laughter came, not loud, polished and restrained, the kind that lives at the back of the throat and never travels to the eyes. The kind of laughter that functions in certain rooms as currency, a small expenditure that buys you standing with the man doing the spending. 3 people laughed, 2 more smiled in the way that is shaped like agreement without technically being agreement. One man, standing slightly behind the group, found something interesting to study on the parquet floor. The young woman Richard Hale was speaking about stood very still. Her name was Claire Navarro. She was 29 years old. She was standing near the east window of the 42nd floor of the Hartwell Tower, and through the glass behind her, Manhattan was doing what Manhattan does in October, which is to be itself so completely and so without apology that the people inside any given room are always slightly smaller than the people outside it imagined. The city was copper and silver out there. In here, the light was the cultivated amber of money at rest. She was wearing a gown that had cost more than Richard Hale's first car. She had not bought it to perform something. She had bought it because she had always known this evening would come, had known it with the particular certainty of someone who has been planning for longer than the people around them can see, and she had decided once and only once to let the outside match the inside. She did not raise her voice. She did not reach for a response. She did not scan the group for an ally, did not look toward Eleanor Marsh, who was standing 2 steps to her left, did not do any of the things that people do when they have been humiliated in public and need the room to validate their pain. She simply looked at Richard Hale, the way you look at something small and entirely predictable, the way you look at a thing that is exactly what you expected it to be and is therefore not very interesting. And then she looked away, that stillness, that particular quality of looking and then looking elsewhere, unhurried, complete in itself. A few people in the room caught it. Not many, but a few, and the ones who caught it felt something they couldn't quite name, something that registered in the chest rather than the mind, a sense that something important had just happened and that they had not fully understood what it was. They would understand it later. Before we go any further, if you have ever stood in a room that someone else built and watched them assume it was theirs, this story is for you. Subscribe right now, because what unfolds in this ballroom over the next 3 hours is the kind of thing that happens once in a career and changes the shape of everyone who witnesses it, and you will not want to arrive late. And while you are there, drop a comment telling us, have you ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea who they were actually talking to? We read every single one, and the answers people leave are always the most extraordinary part. Now, let us go back to the evening Richard Hale made the last mistake of his professional life in a room he believed was his, paid for entirely by a woman he had just finished mocking in front of 30 of the most connected people in New York City. The Hartwell Grand Ballroom occupied the entire northeastern corner of the 42nd floor of the Hartwell Tower, a glass and steel address on 57th Street in Midtown Manhattan that had for the past 11 years been considered one of the 5 most prestigious event spaces in the city. On a clear October evening, you could see 3 bridges from the east windows and the dark ribbon of the Hudson beyond them, moving in the direction of the harbor with a slowness that made the rest of the city look impulsive. Tonight the room held 400 guests seated at 40 tables, $600,000 in floral arrangements that had arrived at 4 in the afternoon and had been precisely placed over the following 90 minutes by a team of 15, a string quartet playing something French and restrained, and a man named Richard Hale, who was having, by his own private assessment, the best evening in recent memory. Richard Hale was 53. Silver at the temples in the way that was fashionable rather than merely aging. His jaw was the product of genetics, discipline, and one procedure in his mid-40s that his publicist referred to as maintenance, which was a word he found acceptable. He ran Hale Capital Partners, a private equity firm with holdings in infrastructure, logistics, media, and what he preferred to call legacy real estate, meaning buildings that had belonged to families with history before they belonged to him. His office was on the 37th floor of this building. He had been profiled in Forbes twice and in the Wall Street Journal once, a piece about mid-market deal sourcing that he had framed and placed in the private dining room of his apartment, where guests could see it during dinner without him having to mention it. He had a way of filling rooms, not because of warmth, because of certainty. There is a particular quality that prolonged, uncontested authority produces in a person, a density of assumption, a weight of self-evidence that rooms feel and respond to without analysis. People turn toward it. They lower their voices slightly in its presence. They laugh half a beat too quickly. Richard Hale moved through spaces with the ease of a man who had long ago stopped noticing this effect because noticing it would have required considering its origin, and the origin was not a place he found it useful to look. Tonight he was the event chair for the Meridian Foundation Gala, the 14th annual fundraiser for youth literacy programs across the 5 boroughs of New York City. He had accepted the chairmanship 11 months ago at the recommendation of his publicist, who had observed that 3 of his largest institutional limited partners had children in programs similar to the ones Meridian ran, and that visible philanthropy in this category was, at this particular moment in the market cycle, what she called load-bearing. He had agreed with the analysis. He had agreed, specifically, with load-bearing. He had attended 3 planning meetings over the course of the year, written a check for $200,000 from his family foundation's operating account, and had done what he was most skilled at doing, arriving at the point where the work was complete, standing where the light was best, and making the result feel like something he had personally produced. He moved through the cocktail hour with the ease of a man who knows every social geography intuitively, reading the room at a glance, categorizing tables, identifying the 3 or 4 people whose attention mattered, and allocating himself accordingly. He held his champagne with 2 fingers in a way that managed to look both casual and precise. He was good at this. He was, in fact, exceptionally good at this. Even the people who did not like him could not entirely deny it. It was 45 minutes before dinner when he saw her. She was standing near the east window, in the alcove between the 2nd and 3rd columns, and she was holding a program in both hands and speaking quietly to a woman he recognized as Eleanor Marsh, the foundation's executive director. Eleanor was laughing, not the performative laughter of a fundraising conversation, but the other kind. The kind that comes from the body rather than the management system, genuine and slightly open in a way that Eleanor, whom he respected but found difficult to read, was not often in public. The young woman beside her had dark hair pulled back in a way that was deliberate in its simplicity, not styled elaborately but arranged with care. And she wore a silver gown that caught the ambient light of the room and held it differently than the other gowns around her, not brighter but deeper, as though the light was settling into the fabric rather than bouncing off it. She was not wearing much jewelry. Her shoes, visible when she shifted weight, were plain, not inexpensive, he could tell, but unornamented. She had the quality that he could only have described as composed, a stillness that was distinct from shyness, that had a texture of choice to it. She looked in the way that caused him to stop and look again, like she belonged. That was the thing. That was the specific thing that produced in him the response that it did. Richard Hale had a finely calibrated radar for belonging, built over 3 decades, calibrated precisely to his own coordinates and to the coordinates of the rooms he occupied. He knew from the particular way her accessories were minimal rather than carefully curated. From the way she was holding the program with both hands rather than tucking it under one arm, the way people who have attended many of these evenings unconsciously do, from a quality he would not have been able to articulate directly, but which arrived as certainty anyway that she was not of the room. She was in the room. She was adjacent to belonging. She was someone's guest, perhaps, a +1 to a board member or a program officer from the nonprofit sector who had been given a seat as a courtesy. He decided this. He decided it in the way that powerful men make decisions that are actually conclusions without noticing the moment the evidence was weighed and found to be sufficient. He crossed toward her with the momentum of a man who has always experienced his own approach as welcome. Eleanor Marsh saw him coming. Something shifted in her expression, not apprehension precisely, more like the look of someone watching a chess piece move toward a square it cannot see clearly, a piece that believes it is advancing. "Richard," Eleanor said. "Eleanor." He kissed her cheek. "Wonderful turnout. You've outdone yourself." "The room does most of it," Eleanor said. Her hand at her side pressed closed and released. He looked at the young woman beside her. "And you are?" "Claire," she said. He waited. She did not add anything, no title, no firm, no social location delivered in the second sentence the way people deliver it at these events, the way people at these events have learned to deliver it, because at these events a name alone is an incomplete sentence. "Claire," he repeated. He said it with a slight delay, the way you repeat something when you are deciding what to do with it. "And what do you do, Claire?" "I'm here for the evening," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the look of a man conducting an assessment that he considers invisible, and what he found was nothing he could file. No firm, no title, no coordinates he recognized. And so he filed her under the only remaining category available to him, the category of people who are present in rooms without having earned the presence. "Right," he said. He turned slightly, the familiar half-pivot that brought the two men behind him, colleagues from the firm, into the radius of the conversation without formally including her in it. "I believe they let just about anyone in these days," he said, and the line arrived with the smoothness of something that had found its groove before, with the comfort of a cruelty that had never been refused, and then the part about the valet and the program and which end to hold, and then the laughter came. Claire Navarro held her champagne glass, very still. 3 feet to her left, a man named Thomas Adeyemi, the Meridian Foundation's legal counsel, was holding his own glass and watching her hold hers still. He had been at the Foundation's board meeting that afternoon, the one at 2 o'clock, the one that had begun with Eleanor Marsh distributing a single-page document and saying quietly, "Before we begin the regular agenda, there is something the board should know about the ownership structure of this building." He had been at that meeting. He pressed his lips together now, looking at his shoes. He did not correct Richard Hale. He would think about that for a long time afterward. He would not be proud of the thinking. The laughter settled. Richard moved on, smooth and unhurried, toward the next cluster of people worth his time, and the building around them all 44 floors of the Hartwell Tower, its elevator banks and its service corridors and the particular draft in the second conference room on the 36th floor, and the cable in elevator 3 that hummed before heavy rain. The building that had belonged to Richard Hale's real estate portfolio for the past 4 years had belonged since 72 hours ago to a Delaware holding company called Navarro Silent Trust, whose registered agent was a law firm in Wilmington and whose sole beneficial owner had dark hair and a silver gown and a very still champagne glass. But the room did not know that yet. The name Navarro had been present in the Hartwell Tower for nearly 3 decades before Navarro Silent Trust ever filed its articles of incorporation in Delaware. Miguel Navarro had arrived at the building in the spring of 1998. He came through a maintenance contractor, a small firm that serviced several commercial properties in Midtown, and that had taken on a new account when the tower changed management. He was 32 years old at the time, and he brought to the work what he brought to everything, which was a particular quality of attention that his employers noticed within a month and could not quite categorize. He was not merely reliable. He was observant in the way that only people who have learned to be invisible can be, noticing the small dysfunctions of a building before they became large ones, the ceiling tile that was slightly out of true, the water pressure fluctuation that preceded a pump-bearing failure by 2 weeks, the elevator door that was developing a hesitation in cold weather that would, if left unaddressed, eventually strand someone between floors. He became permanent within the year. He worked the night shift for 11 years, the day shift for 9 after that. He learned the building the way a musician learns a piece, not note by note, but as a living system with its own logic and rhythms, something that could be felt rather than merely understood. He knew which conference room the partners used for conversations they did not want recorded, not because he listened, but because he noticed when they moved their own chairs, which was not something the cleaners moved back afterward. He knew which partners stayed late and which ones left at 5 and which ones had someone in the office who was not on the org chart. He knew these things the way the building knew them, passively as a function of presence over time. He raised his daughter through the paychecks this building produced, not a dramatic statement, a literal one. The tuition for her school was paid in installments from his maintenance wages, calibrated against the monthly schedule he kept in a small notebook in the breast pocket of his uniform jacket. The debate tournament fees, the textbooks, the winter coat when she was 12 that she had not asked for but that he had noticed she needed, all of it flowed from this building's existence into her life through his hands, which were the intermediary through which the building's economic product passed before becoming her future. She came to the building twice, once at 7, when he brought her on a Saturday morning to see where he worked, and she stood in the lobby looking up at the atrium ceiling with her mouth slightly open. Once at 15, when she met him after her school day ended and they rode the service elevator to the roof together on a July evening to watch the sun drop behind New Jersey, and he told her, for the first time in any detail, what the building cost to heat in February and what it earned in rent per square foot and why those two numbers mattered. She had already known the second part. She had been reading commercial real estate pricing indexes for 2 years by then, not because anyone told her to, because the information was available and she was the kind of person who stored what was available, who built mental models from accessible data, the way other people build with whatever is at hand. Her father did not know she was doing this. He would not have encouraged it in the way he encouraged her to study chemistry and economics and to practice her rhetoric for debate, because he did not want her to optimize her ambitions around buildings. He wanted her to sit at the tables he polished rather than polish the ones where others sat. This was not a spoken instruction. It was a directive enacted over decades, methodically, shift by shift, tuition payment by tuition payment, $20 bill folded into a lunch bag by $20 bill folded into a lunch bag, with no note, because Miguel Navarro was not a man who annotated his love. She was accepted to Columbia University on a partial merit scholarship, which covered 60% of the cost. Her father covered the remaining 40 from savings he had been building since before she started high school, in an account at a credit union on 207th Street, where he had banked since 1995 and where the tellers still called him by name. She studied finance and real estate development. She graduated in the top 4% of her class, which was a cohort that contained some of the most analytically capable people of their generation. Her professors remembered her for something distinct from raw ability, which was common there. They remembered her for the quality of her silence in seminar, the way she waited until she had something the room did not already have before she offered it, and the way what she offered was always exactly that. Never elaboration, never performance. One professor told another at a department dinner that Claire Navarro listened like someone who was building something. After Columbia, she took a position at a boutique real estate advisory firm on the East Side, a firm that worked on acquisitions in the middle market, transactions in the $50 to $300 million range that were too complex for generalists and too small for the institutional shops. She was not the youngest associate. She was the most methodical. She did not seek attention from partners. She sought information from systems, from deal structures, from the documents that lived in data rooms that nobody else had read completely. Within 3 years, she was leading due diligence on acquisitions that her managing director presented to clients. Within 4, she was the reason 3 of those clients came back. She left to build her own vehicle. She was 26. The money she had came from several sources that compounded into something her model said was sufficient. Her maternal grandmother had died when Claire was in her second year at Columbia and had left a policy of $120,000, the accumulation of a life insurance payment her grandmother's employer had offered as a benefit in 1971 and which her grandmother had paid premiums on for 37 years without ever being certain what it was for. Her grandmother had once said that it was for when something happens, which was the kind of logic that produces generational transfers even when the people making them do not have language for what they are doing. There was also a settlement. When Claire was 19, her father had been injured in the building, a wet floor near the service entrance on level 2, inadequately marked after a pipe repair, a fall that required surgery on his left knee and 6 weeks of modified duty. The building's management at the time had handled the matter quickly and quietly, which meant well enough to stay out of court and not well enough to stay out of memory. The settlement, after her father's attorney took his third, had been $68,000. Her father had tried to give it to her for school. She had made him put $40,000 of it into his own retirement account and had taken $28,000 herself, which she had immediately invested in a diversified position in 3 real estate investment trusts that her coursework told her were undervalued relative to their cap rate compression history. The third source was a carried interest distribution from a logistics real estate fund she had invested in at 26, alongside a partner from her advisory days who had seen the same mispricing she had seen. The fund outperformed its benchmark by 31 points over 3 years. The distribution, when it arrived, was a number with more digits than anything she had seen outside of a projected income statement. She did not tell anyone. She hired 2 people, a corporate attorney, a woman named Sandra Kim, who had grown up in a situation similar enough to her own that she understood the particular weight of money accumulated from nothing, the specific obligation it carries, the way it requires more care than inherited wealth because it has no safety net beneath it, and a tax advisor who had, as a young man, watched his own parents navigate the complexity of an unexpected inheritance from a position of complete ignorance about the relevant law, and who had vowed to spend his career ensuring that nobody else approached significant money from that position. Together, the 3 of them built Navarro Silent Trust, a Delaware entity. No website, no LinkedIn presence, no press, no advisory board, no naming strategy. Her first acquisition was a small commercial building in central Harlem, purchased through the trust for $4.8 million, well below what the building would have attracted in a transparent sale. She identified it through a contact at a title company who flagged properties with estate complications, a category that created pricing inefficiencies because the sellers were not optimizing for maximum value. The property was leased to 3 tenants, a medical office, a community organization, and a restaurant that had been in the same family for 22 years. She refinanced 18 months later, extracted capital, and did not raise rents. Then a parking structure in Long Island City, then an industrial building in Mott Haven that 3 institutional buyers had passed on because the zoning was in a complicated interim state. She was not bothered by the complication. She understood the zoning process well enough to see where it would resolve, and she had the patience for the timeline because she was not optimizing for a quarterly return. She was optimizing for permanence. This was a thing she had learned from her father without him knowing he had taught it. The Hartwell Tower acquisition began 2 years ago. It began, as her decisions always began, because the model said the pricing was attractive. The building came to market through a sale-leaseback arrangement structured by the previous ownership group, which created specific conditions in which the buyer pool was smaller than the asset warranted, which meant that a patient buyer with ready capital could acquire it at a discount to intrinsic value. She was a patient buyer with ready capital. The deal closed 72 hours before the gala. She had known about the gala for 6 months. She had become aware of it through a community newsletter that covered the Meridian Foundation's work, which she followed because her father had attended a literacy program sponsored by the foundation in 1993. Before she was born, when he was first learning to navigate documents in English, and the fact was lodged in her knowledge of him the way certain facts become structural rather than merely biographical. She had registered as an individual donor under her own name, attached to no entity, described in no publicly searchable profile that anyone at Hale Capital Partners would have thought to pull. Because men like Richard Hale did not research guests at charity events. They read the room the way he always read rooms, by surface, by signal, by the invisible rapid calculus of who looks like someone and who does not. She had contacted the foundation's development director 4 months before the gala. She had made an anonymous gift to underwrite the entire operational cost of the evening, the venue rental, the catering, the staff, the string quartet, the floral arrangements, the printing of the programs, the valet service, the signage, the audio and visual equipment, every line item in the event budget. $640,000 wired from the trust's operating account with a memo line that read Meridian Foundation Gala, transferred with the cleanness of a number that had been waiting to move. She had asked for one thing in return, that her name not appear in the program. She had wanted to see the room when it did not know it was hers. She wanted to understand from the inside what a room looks like when it is performing gratitude without knowing the object of its gratitude. She also wanted to understand what Richard Hale looked like in a room he believed he owned. Now she knew. In the green room adjacent to the ballroom, at 6:40 in the evening, Richard Hale rehearsed his remarks with his chief of staff, a young man named Derek Colfax, who had been with the firm for 4 years and who was exceptionally competent at logistics and less so at moral judgment. Derek ran through the timeline from his tablet with the precision of someone who believes that precision of this kind is sufficient. 7:30, dinner. 8:15, opening remarks from the chair, 5 minutes. 8:20, featured speaker, Eleanor Marsh, 10 minutes including the fundraising announcement. 8:50, dessert service. 9:15, close and networking. Are we above target on pledges? Richard asked, adjusting the placement of his pocket square with 2 fingers. 4.2 million, Derek said. Target was 3.8. Good. Richard looked at himself in the long mirror at the far end of the green room and found what he found there satisfactory. Make sure the Times photographer gets the check presentation. I want a clean background. Nobody in the frame who isn't supposed to be. Derek made a note. And the woman Eleanor was talking to earlier, the one near the east window. Derek looked up. Find out who she came with. She didn't register a firm. Derek nodded and made another note. In the ballroom, the cocktail reception was giving way to the seating for dinner. The quiet orchestration of a 400-person sit-down event moved like a current beneath the surface of the social activity, invisible when done well, which it was being done tonight because the operations manager, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had run events in this room for 19 years, understood that invisibility was its own form of excellence. Claire Navarro found her table. Table 7, near the southeast quadrant of the room, positioned at exactly the right distance from the head table to observe it completely without being the focus of it. She sat between Thomas Adeyemi, who did not look at her directly when she sat down and whose attempt to arrange his expression into neutral had the slight overcorrection of effort, and a woman named Diane Foster, who ran a literacy nonprofit in the South Bronx, and who had the easy warmth of someone who has spent enough years doing real work that performative pleasantries have long since become unnecessary. Diane did not know who Claire was. She began talking as the bread arrived with the comfortable momentum of someone for whom conversation is as natural as breathing and who asks questions the way good journalists do, because they are genuinely curious and not because they are filling space. Are you with a board member? Diane asked. I'm here as an individual donor, Claire said. Which programs interest you? Elementary, middle, or secondary? Elementary mostly, the foundation years. My father attended one of their predecessor programs, actually, a long time ago. Diane's expression warmed further. That's extraordinary. Did he tell you about it? He mentioned it once. He's not a man who talks about what helped him, Claire said. He just shows you what it produced. Diane considered this. I like that very much. The bread was good. The butter had fleur de sel. You know what's remarkable about tonight? Diane said, breaking a roll with the casualness of someone who is not afraid to eat at galas. Someone funded this whole event anonymously, Eleanor told me this afternoon. $640,000 just to cover the room and the food and everything, so that every pledge tonight goes directly to programs. No overhead, no event costs, just programs. Claire lifted her water glass. She said the donor asked for nothing, Diane continued, shaking her head in something close to reverence. No table named after them, no portrait, no annual relationship, just a check and a note asking not to be listed in the program. Can you imagine, at this level? Most donors at this level want you to rename the foundation. I can imagine it, Claire said. Some people find the naming unnecessary. Diane looked at her. There was a half-formed question in Diane's eyes, the beginning of a connection being drawn, and then the waiter arrived with the first course, and the moment passed. Across the room, at the head table, Richard Hale was doing what Richard Hale did across every dinner table he had ever occupied. Commanding the conversation without appearing to command it, the way a composer conducts without appearing to control the orchestra. He told a story about a deal in Denver to the man on his left and watched the man nod with the rhythm of someone who is processing status rather than content. He made a single remark about the wine that caused the sommelier to pause and look over, which was what the remark was designed to do. He complimented Eleanor Marsh's choice of speaker for the program section, which was himself in addition to Eleanor, which made the compliment a gesture of magnanimity toward his own participation. He glanced once toward table 7. He saw the young woman from the alcove in the silver gown, speaking to the woman beside her. He categorized the table as peripheral and returned to his own. He did not know her name. He had not asked Derek about her yet. Derek's note was still on his tablet. This was the last clean interval, the last moment before the room changed shape. The first course was consumed. The second arrived. Outside the windows, Manhattan continued at its own pace, indifferent to interior dramas of any scale, producing its constant low signal of aggregate human activity. The lights of the other towers, the infinitely various movement of a city at 8 o'clock on an October Tuesday. Thomas Adeyemi ate his dinner with the mechanical precision of a man whose mind is somewhere else. He was a careful attorney, careful in the specific way that comes from having learned early that care is the only thing that separates adequate from essential. He had been careful this afternoon in the board meeting when Eleanor presented the ownership document. He had been careful about his expression, careful about his questions, careful about not saying, in that room, the one thing he needed not to say before the evening began. He had been less careful at the window. He had been present at the window, and he had been silent there, and silence he knew had a texture. He was aware that Claire Navarro knew he had been silent. He was aware that she had not required him to speak. That, too, was information. He cut his salmon into precise thirds and did not taste any of them. The event's operational timeline moved with the inertia of a well-built machine. Dinner cleared, lights adjusted by 10 degrees of warm, the quartet dropped to ambient volume, and then stopped. Eleanor Marsh rose from the head table. She walked to the podium with the unhurried walk of a woman who has stood at enough podiums to know that the walk itself is part of the moment. But first, Richard Hale. He rose before her, his prerogative as event chair, and crossed the room to the podium with the ease of a man for whom podiums are furniture. He arranged his notes, which he did not need, looked up at the room with a specific quality of assessment that he calibrated to read as warmth, and spoke. "Good evening," he said. The room gave him its attention without negotiation. He was good. It was worth acknowledging even now, even knowing what was coming. He was a skilled public speaker who understood pacing, who knew that silence was a tool and that the strategic deployment of it created the impression of depth even in its absence. He spoke about the Meridian Foundation's 14-year history with the specific kind of pride that a person produces when they have attached themselves recently to something old and want the attachment to seem constitutional. He spoke about the children in the programs, 12,000 now across 5 boroughs, and he did this with a warmth that was performed but not entirely hollow because some part of him, some actual part, was not unaffected by the number. He said the word legacy 4 times. He mentioned 2 major donors by name, both of them men, both of them in the room, both of whom nodded with the deliberate modesty of people who are glad to be named. He did not mention an anonymous gift. because he did not know about it. He returned to his seat to applause that was genuine in the way that applause becomes genuine when it is prolonged, because the act of applauding together produces sincerity whether or not the sincerity preceded the act. Eleanor Marsh took the podium. She was 61 years old and had spent 30 years doing the kind of work that other people attended galas to celebrate. She had a quality that some people called fierceness, and that was actually something slightly different, something closer to a kind of clarified purpose, a sense that she had long ago stopped investing energy in anything that was not load-bearing. Her silver hair was short. She was wearing a dark blue blazer over a white shirt, the most formally underdressed person in the room, which was its own form of authority. She set a piece of paper on the podium. She looked up at the room. "Before we move to dessert," she said, "I have one more announcement, and I want to give it the time it deserves." The room understood, from the quality of her pause, that this was not procedural. "Tonight," she said, "in addition to the $4.2 million raised through your extraordinary generosity at this table, the Meridian Foundation received a separate gift. An anonymous gift made 4 months ago, intended to cover the complete operational cost of this evening." She looked at the paper. "The venue, the catering, the staffing, the flowers, which are extraordinary." She looked up. There was the beginning of something in the room, an atmospheric shift, the particular murmur that begins before people know what they are responding to. The printing of the programs, the quartet, the valet service, the audio and visual, every line item in the event budget, $640,000, given with no conditions, no naming rights, and one request, that the donor not be listed in the program. The murmur deepened. "What this means," Eleanor said, "is that every single dollar pledged tonight, from the first to the last, goes directly to children in literacy programs. Every dollar, 100%, nothing taken off the top." The room moved, not to applause yet, but to something before applause, the collective intake of understanding that precedes it. "Earlier today," Eleanor continued, and now her voice had acquired a quality that she was controlling carefully and not entirely succeeding in controlling, the quality of someone for whom this is not professional but personal. "The donor contacted us. They asked if we might share their name with the room this evening. They said," she looked at the paper again, briefly, then back up, "that they felt the room deserved to know." A complete silence now. The kind of silence that requires 400 people to be quiet simultaneously, and that, when it happens, has a quality of held breath. "The donor who funded this entire evening," Eleanor Marsh said, "is Claire Navarro." She looked at table 7. Every head in the room turned in the direction of Eleanor's gaze. Claire Navarro set down her water glass. She did not stand. She did not smile with the wide, prepared smile of an anticipated acknowledgement. She inclined her head once in Eleanor's direction, the smallest possible nod, the acknowledgement of a woman who had never needed the room and was accepting its attention now because it had been offered, and refusing it would have been its own kind of theatre. And then she looked across the room at Richard Hale. He was looking at her, the silver gown, the plain shoes, the program she had held with both hands when the valet pressed it into them, not because she hadn't known which end held the opening remarks and which held the donor list, but because the program was one of the things she had paid for, and she had wanted to hold it carefully. A pause. What moved across Richard Hale's face in that interval was not one thing, but a sequence of things arriving in rapid succession, like keys being pressed without release, chords overlapping. First, a technical recalibration, the mind processing a factual mismatch, then a search for the corrective frame, the interpretation that could make this manageable, then the awareness that the room had understood faster than he had, that the room was already processing what he was still trying to file, and that the awareness of the room's understanding had produced in the room a sound, not laughter, not gasps, something more specific than either. The particular sound of a large group of people absorbing an irony that is complete and non-negotiable, a sound that is very quiet but has a great deal in it. Phones had appeared, not elevated for photography, not yet, but out. Screens live, held in laps or held at table level, the unconscious gesture of a generation that reaches for its phone when something is happening that it does not yet have language for. The applause began at the back of the room. It began there because the back of the room held the people with the clearest picture of what had just happened. The non-profit representatives, the program officers, the foundation staff who had known about the gift for 4 months and had been asked to hold the information and had held it, at some cost, to their own desire to speak. They understood, completely and without ambiguity, what a gift of this structure meant, what it said about the person making it, what it required. They had attended enough fundraising dinners to know that this was not how it was usually done, and that the degree to which this was not how it was usually done was proportional to the significance of doing it this way. The applause moved forward through the room, the way applause moves when it is not coordinated through a sequence of recognitions rather than a single cue, and it gained weight as it moved, taking on the additions of table after table until it reached the front of the room and was very full there. Richard Hale clapped. He clapped twice with the hands of a man who has understood something irreversible and is choosing precisely how to be seen in the moment of understanding it. 2 claps, controlled, appropriate. The minimum that could not be read as refusal. Beside him, Derek Colfax had placed his phone face down on the table. He was looking at the center of the tablecloth, with a quality of attention that was entirely directed inward. James Whitmore, managing director, who had been sitting 3 seats to Richard's right and who had laughed at the valet comment earlier with the unthinking laugh of a subordinate, had turned his chair a precise 45 degrees toward the exit, not quite facing it, but oriented in its direction the way a compass needle orients. Eleanor Marsh waited at the podium. She was in no hurry. She had managed this room for 14 years, and she understood that there were moments in a room that needed to finish before you moved forward, and that moving forward before they finished was a form of interruption even when the moment was technically concluded. The applause settled. "We are grateful," she said, when the room had come back to quiet, "to Claire and to everyone in this room for what you have made possible for these children tonight." A beat. "Please enjoy dessert." She walked back to her seat. She did not look at Richard Hale as she passed the head table. The room came back to itself in the way that rooms return after large things have happened in them, which is not the way they were before, but something adjacent to it, the same furniture in slightly different positions. Conversations resumed at a lower register, more careful, more conscious of their audience. Waitstaff moved with the quiet efficiency of people who have understood that this is the part where they become especially invisible. Thomas Adeyemi exhaled. It was audible. "Miss Navarro," he said. "Tom," she said. He looked at his water glass. He looked at his hands. He said, with the precision of a man choosing the only thing that was actually appropriate, "Your legal team should expect a call from mine on Monday regarding the transition of ownership for the building. We'll want to establish the new management protocol." "I know," she said. "I'll let them know." He nodded, a long pause. "For what it's worth," he said. "I'm sorry about earlier, that I didn't." She looked at him for a moment. The look was not warm and not cold and not forgiving and not withholding. It was simply direct, the look of a person for whom the response to this particular kind of apology is not something that can be performed in 3 seconds at a dinner table. "I know," she said again, and that, for now, was everything. The dessert arrived with the delicate confidence of something that has cost more than its components warrant and knows it. The plates were small and architectural and precise, the kind of dessert that is eaten in 4 bites if you eat it at all, which half the room did not. People were talking, people were moving between tables with the magnetic reorganization of a room that has just had its center of gravity reclassified. 3 people came to table 7 in the next 20 minutes. The first was a development officer from another foundation, a man in his 40s with a business card already between his fingers and the practiced warmth of someone who fundraises as a sport. "Claire Navarro, right? I run the Brixton Family Foundation's Programs Division. Do you have a card?" "I don't carry them," Claire said pleasantly. "But you can reach me through Meridian. They have my contact." The man nodded and went away. The second was a board member named Gerald Okafor, a man who had served on the Meridian board for 9 years and who had known Eleanor Marsh since before the foundation had its current name. He stopped at the table without pulling out a chair and did not produce a card. "Your father," he said. "He maintained this floor, this exact floor." He stopped. "For years he did when I first joined the board. He was always here when we arrived, already finished, already gone. I always meant to know his name. Miguel, Claire said. His name is Miguel. Miguel, Gerald repeated as though adding it to a permanent record. Thank you, both of you. He walked away. The third was a woman from a media organization whose name Claire recognized as the kind of organization that would be very interested in this story for reasons that had something to do with its symbolic completeness and nothing to do with any ongoing relationship with her. I'd love to speak with you, the woman said, even briefly. Not tonight, Claire said, but I'll be available next week. Reach me through Meridian Foundation. The woman said she would. She left. Diane Foster had been quiet through all three of these exchanges. When the last of the three had gone, Diane picked up her dessert fork and said, So, Claire said, the anonymous donor. Claire looked at her. Yes. Diane made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was in the same family. I said some things about that person earlier. You said the right things, Claire said. I said that thing about believing in something. That was the right thing, Claire said again. A pause. Your father, Diane said, is here? In the back of the room. Diane looked in that direction. Is he all right? He's fine, Claire said. He's been in this building for 20 years. He's comfortable here. More comfortable than some people, Diane said. Claire smiled. It was the first smile of the evening, genuine and contained, and very brief. Across the room, Richard Hale remained at the head table through the entirety of the dessert course and through the beginning of the post-dessert networking period. He remained there because leaving immediately would have been an admission, and he was not a man who made admissions. He remained there and spoke to the person on his right about an infrastructure deal in the Southwest with the focused, specific attention of a man who needs the conversation to be sufficient in itself, to be a room he can stay inside. His phone buzzed. He did not look at it. It buzzed again, a third time, and a fourth very quickly after, which was Derek's signal for something that required his immediate attention, and he picked up the phone and read the message and put it back down, and the message said, LP in the building deal is asking questions. Whitmore says 2 others called him in the last 10 minutes. Navarro Silent Trust. She's the buyer. He kept his face exactly as it had been. He had been practicing this face for 53 years, and he was good at it. The room had known for 35 minutes what he was only processing now, that he had been the event chair of an evening funded entirely by the person he had dismissed at the window, that the building around him, all 44 floors of it, had been acquired 3 days ago by a holding company controlled by the janitor's daughter he had mocked in front of 30 people for not knowing which end of a program to hold. He was a tenant in her building, running an event she had paid for, having told her 30 people's worth of laughter that she didn't belong. He lifted his champagne glass. It had been empty for 40 minutes. He had not called for more because calling for more would have required attracting a server's attention, and he was not certain, in this moment, what his face would do when someone looked at it directly. A waiter passed. He did not call out. The networking period thinned the room in the predictable sequence, first the people who had early mornings, then the people who had said what they came to say, then the people for whom the event was social obligation fulfilled. The event staff began the peripheral work of clearing, moving through the edges of the room with the professional absence of people who have learned to work inside social events without being registered as present. Patricia Ose passed behind the head table at 9:23. She had managed this floor for 19 years, and she managed it by noticing. She noticed the champagne glass. She noticed the hands. The right hand was pressed against the table with a force the gesture did not require, and the knuckles held in them the white of sustained pressure. She noted it and continued to the service corridor. Richard Hale left the ballroom at 9:31 through the side exit closest to the private elevator bank. He walked with the walk he always used, measured and deliberate, the walk of someone who is not in a hurry because people in a hurry have somewhere to be that isn't here. He did not look toward table 7. He pressed the elevator button and waited and did not look at anyone while he waited. His driver was at the curb. He got into the car. The door closed. Inside the building, on the 42nd floor, Claire Navarro walked to the back of the room. Her father stood when he saw her coming. He had been sitting very still for the past 40 minutes. The way he always sat when he was in public places where stillness was required of him, the habituated discipline of someone who has learned to contain himself in spaces that were not designed for his comfort. He was wearing the dark suit that he and his sister had chosen together at a store on Fordham Road 3 weeks ago, when Claire had told him only that there was an event she wanted him to attend and that she wanted him to feel good. He had not asked questions. He had pressed the suit himself the morning of with a hand iron, with the precision of a man for whom taking care of a thing is a form of respect. He stood when he saw her coming, and he held himself very straight in the way of someone who has always been required to be precise about his own occupation of space. She walked to him and put her arms around him. He put one hand on her back, wide and certain, the way he had always placed it. "Mija," he said. "Papa," she said. He did not say anything else because he did not have language for what he was feeling, and he was not a man who substituted performance for language when language was insufficient. He had raised his daughter in that principle as thoroughly as he had raised her in anything, the understanding that silence, held with the right quality of intention, is a form of speaking. They stood together while the room moved around them. The staff was clearing. The musicians were packing their instruments with the careful speed of professionals who have done this many times. Eleanor Marsh was crossing the room toward them with the walk of someone who has been waiting for the right moment, which this was. "Miguel," she said, taking his hand in both of hers, "your daughter is remarkable." "Yes," he said simply. "I mean that in ways that go beyond tonight," Eleanor said. "I hope you know that." He looked at his daughter. "I know what she is," he said. Eleanor nodded. She looked at Claire. "I'll be in touch on Monday about the next steps with the foundation, if you're still interested in what we discussed." "I'm interested," Claire said. "Call any time." Eleanor squeezed her hand once and moved away. Miguel Navarro looked at the room, the 42nd floor, the east windows, the city beyond them doing what it always did, the bridges and the water and the lights, exactly as he had seen it from this floor on 10,000 nights over 20 years, arriving before the first morning tenant and leaving after the last evening cleaner, and knowing this room in the way of someone who maintains a thing for long enough that the maintenance becomes a form of ownership, of understanding that precedes and outlasts any legal document. "Do you want to walk the floor?" Claire asked. "Before we go?" He considered it. He looked toward the service corridor door, the one marked with the blue indicator strip that designated service access, the one he had passed through more times than any entrance in his life. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight I came in the front." She took his arm. They went out through the front. The car that waited for them was not conspicuous. A black sedan, clean, not a limousine. Claire had decided a long time ago that the measure of arrival was not the size of what arrived. In a car moving south on the West Side Highway, Richard Hale sat with his phone in his pocket and the city on his left, and 30 years of professional scaffolding in the process of a structural review whose results he could not yet see. His assistant had sent 3 messages. His general counsel had called twice. His publicist had texted, "Call me before you speak to anyone. Do not speak to anyone." James Whitmore had sent a message that said simply, "The LPs have questions. I told them you'd connect tomorrow," which meant that Whitmore had been managing the LPs tonight, which meant the LPs had required managing, which meant the announcement had been the kind of thing that caused institutional investors to pick up their phones at 9:30 on a Tuesday evening, which was information about the magnitude of what had happened. He opened his messages and read them with the specific blankness of a man who is absorbing data without allowing his face to register the weight of it, a skill he had deployed thousands of times in 20 years of deal-making, in negotiating rooms where the other side was watching his expression for the information his words were not providing. He wrote back to Whitmore, "Set calls for 8 tomorrow, I'll handle it." He wrote back to his general counsel, "In the car, we'll call at 8. He wrote back to his publicist, "Understood." He put the phone in his pocket. The car crossed the bridge. The city fell behind, and then was beside them, and then was ahead, rearranging itself in the windows with the indifference of a thing that does not care about any individual narrative occurring within it. He arrived at his building on the Upper West Side and took the elevator to the 14th floor. His apartment had 6,000 square feet. He had paid for it in cash 3 years ago, a number that had felt like the right weight for the life he had built. Tonight, it felt like a different measurement. He poured scotch, 2 fingers. He sat in the chair by the window with the park below and the city in all directions, and he thought about the morning, the LP calls, the lease renegotiation from a position he had not anticipated, the board meeting on Thursday with an atmosphere he had not projected. He held all of it in the organized way of a man who knows that management begins with inventory. And then, when the inventory was complete and the scotch was done, he thought about the window, the cocktail hour, the woman in the silver gown, her hands on the program, the particular quality of her stillness when he had delivered the line, not flinching, not hardening, just becoming more precisely herself, as though his attention had done nothing except confirm something she already knew. He had read the stillness as submission. He had read the calm as emptiness. He had looked at the absence of the usual social signals and concluded that their absence meant absence, that she was less than the room, that the room was something he could measure and that she did not measure up. He had been wrong about the measurement. He had been wrong about what was being measured. The city was very bright outside the window. It was always bright from this height on a clear night. It was one of the things he had loved about this apartment, the particular way the city looked from a position above most of it, the feeling that the scale of the view was proportional to the scale of the life. He sat in it for a long time, and it felt the same and different. He had not lost the apartment, he had not lost the firm, he would manage the LPs, he would renegotiate the lease. He would navigate the quarter and the year and the next with the competence that had carried him this far. Because competence, real competence built over decades, does not dissolve in a single evening, no matter how complete the evening's reversal. But there are things that, once lost, cannot be recovered by competence or management or the correct sequence of phone calls. The ability to look at a room and trust your own reading of it. The certainty that invisibility is a fact about the invisible person rather than a choice they are making. The confidence that the table you sit at is yours by some self-evident right of presence. These were gone. They had been built on something he had never examined because he had never needed to examine it. The assumption that the surfaces of things were a reliable guide to their substance, that what he saw was what was there, that what he knew was equivalent to what existed. That assumption had governed 30 years of decisions and had produced mostly results consistent with its premises. And then one woman had stood at a window in a silver gown holding a program with both hands and looked at him the way you look at something you understand completely and find not very interesting. And the assumption had revealed itself to be exactly what it had always been, not a foundation. A convenience, something you lean on because you have never stood somewhere that required you not to. He sat in the chair until well past midnight, in Inwood on a quiet block where the bodega on the corner had been open since before Claire was born. She walked with her father in the flat shoes she had switched to in the car, the heels in her bag. The city quiet here in the way that cities are quiet when you move far enough from their centers that the ambient sound drops below the threshold of registering. The super of the building, 2 doors down, recognized Miguel and raised a hand from the stoop, and Miguel raised a hand back, the exchange of 2 men who have lived in the same place long enough that greeting requires no elaboration. "That man," her father said, meaning the super, "has been on that stoop since I moved here." "I know," she said. They walked another half block. A leaf moved across the sidewalk in a wind that was barely wind, more a suggestion. "Were you nervous?" he asked. She thought about it for a moment. "No," she said. "I was ready, there's a difference." "Yes," he said. "There is." He walked with the slight accommodation in his left knee that he had walked with since the surgery, not a limp but a cadence, the body's notation of something it had been through. She had learned to match it unconsciously years ago. "Your mother," he said. Not a full sentence. An opening. "I know," she said. She would have had something to say about the flowers. $600,000 in flowers. $640,000 in everything, she said. The flowers were part of it. She would have appreciated the distinction, he said. A pause. "The building," he said, more careful now, approaching something. "What about it? I'd like to go back, not to work, just to walk it." "I know," she said. "You can, any time." "Not to fix anything," he said. "I don't think I could fix anything now." My knee? Just to walk it, she said, just to walk it. She took his arm and they walked the remaining block to his building in the companionable quiet of two people who have said what needed to be said and are now simply present in the saying's aftermath. At the door, she kissed him on the cheek. He held her hand for a moment before releasing it and went inside. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment after the door closed. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, a window had a light in it, and behind the light a television was on, and the television was producing the constant low murmur of a story being told to someone in an otherwise quiet room. She thought about the building, all 44 floors of it, the elevator in shaft 3 that hummed before rain, the draft in the second conference room on 36, the service corridors that her father could have navigated in the complete dark, which he had navigated on more nights than either of them could count, doing the work that made the building available to the people who did not think about who had made it available. She thought about the check, $640,000 wired from an account that had no face. She thought about the room not knowing it was hers. She had wanted to understand what it looked like, and now she did. It had not given her satisfaction in the way that revenge in stories gives satisfaction, with a clean arc and a definitive ending. It had given her something more useful, which was confirmation that the assumption was exactly as fixed and as blind as she had understood it to be, that she had given the room a fact it could not unknow, which was not the same as changing it, but was the beginning of that longer, less satisfying, more real process. She thought about the children in reading programs who would benefit this year from money that had gone entirely to them. She thought about her father's hand on her back, wide and certain. She walked the 2 blocks to where her car was parked, got in, and drove south toward the bridge. The city received her the way it receives everyone who moves through it, with a purpose it recognizes as serious, which is to say, without ceremony or acknowledgement, the way a river receives water that joins it, without pausing, without distinction, continuing in the direction it was already going. There are buildings in every city that outlast the names on their leases. There are children who learn to read in rooms whose donors they will never know, and whose lives are shaped by that reading in ways that cannot be attributed or measured or photographed at a podium. There are people who maintain the infrastructure of ambition while ambition names itself after the maintenance, and there are people who understand quietly, precisely, with the patience of someone who has watched this for long enough to know what is real and what is arrangement, that all arrangements are provisional, that belonging is not conferred by height, it is earned by depth, and the daughter of the man who maintained the machine had not merely inherited access to the table. She had bought the building.